The G20 Summit occupied all media attention last week with the gathering of world leaders in New Delhi. Under its G20 presidency, New Delhi did something unique that has been largely lauded by countries across the world. It made a strong pitch to include the voice of countries which aren't in the G20 grouping. Let's talk about India's strong pitch for Global South. What is this Global South? How is it important in the current world order? How has India emerged as the voice of the Global South? This is Quick Take, your quick guide. I'm Smita Prakash. In a big push to the Global South, the African Union was made a full member of the G20 under India's presidency. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his inaugural address of the first session of the Global Leaders Summit, announced that the African Union had been made a full member of the G20.
मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए।
This point of view was also echoed by the Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar throughout India's presidency, that India had walked the talk about raising concerns of developing countries in a world fraught with divisions, especially after COVID and the Ukrainian conflict.
It is undeniable reality that the international system remains dominated by the global north. This is naturally reflected in the composition of the G20 as well. The need to focus on developing countries has become more compelling. If that was not enough, the consequences of the Ukraine conflict for global food, energy and fertilizer security has added to complexities. So when you reflect on it, the discourse about the Global South is essentially about leaving no one behind. But to preach it convincingly, one has to practice it effectively. And that is what India has sought to do over the last decade.
But the term Global South has created a buzz across the world, and India has been credited for popularizing the term. The relevance of Global South has also gained momentum in the recent past as nations walk the diplomatic tightrope amid the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The phrase was used to point at nations that were economically less progressive than the countries of the North and were seen as underdeveloped or developing countries. Many of them were part of the non-aligned movement, which gained popularity during the Cold War period. These countries were caught in a wedge and craved for a multipolar world. So how did Global South, that term, originate? It is believed that an American political activist coined the term Global South way back in 1969. Soon countries of the so-called Third World were lumped into this bracket. They called for a new economic world order, but their voice went largely unheard. That was till 1980, when the 1980 Brand Report came out. Written by an international commission led by former West German Chancellor Willy Brandt, the document distinguished between those countries with comparatively higher GDP per capita, which were overwhelmingly concentrated in the Northern Hemisphere, and the poorer ones, which incidentally fell south of what came to be known as the Brandt Line, after Willy Brandt. The imaginary boundary ran from the Rio Grande into the Gulf of Mexico, across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean Sea, and over Central Asia to the Pacific Ocean. The Cold War ended and the term Third World also fell out of favor, either because it was pejorative or because there was no Second World Order left. The Global South became the more flexible, neutral and appealing term. Cut to 2023. During the 15th BRICS Summit in South Africa, Prime Minister Modi said that the Global South is not just a diplomatic term but represents the shared history of these countries under colonialism and apartheid, based on which modern relations are being reshaped, and also emphasized undertaking reforms in the United Nations Security Council. The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea called Prime Minister Modi the leader of the Global South.
We need a big third voice to be active for the small island nations at G20, at G7. We appreciate your presence with us at FIBIC. You are the voice that can offer. We want you to be an advocate for us and given support by you, the leader of the Global South. And I put to you as the leader of the third realm.
So why are countries comfortable to see India as the voice of the Global South as compared to, say, China, which was positioning itself as the leader of the group? For one, even the countries of the North are not comfortable seeing China head any bloc of nations, whether ASEAN or the Global South. Japan, as head of the G7 countries, would rather have India being the voice of the developing nations of the Global South. Even in New Delhi, it was quite apparent that it was India's push that finally led the G20 to include the African Union grouping of 55 countries to be admitted as the new member of the G20. In January this year, India hosted a summit, Voice of Global South Summit, in which more than 120 developing nations took part in the event. It was since then that the idea took shape that since European Union countries are represented by the EU, the African Union also must be included. This was backed by the US and French presidents. India's efforts to provide a common platform to diverse ideas and innovative solutions and address the concerns of countries whose voices have so far been muted by more prosperous countries is being appreciated. The G20 meets decisions in New Delhi will be another step to bring to the world a fair and inclusive representative global architecture and governance model. That's all for now. We'll see you next time with another quick guide. Jai Hind.